Welcome back. President Joe Biden has just a few weeks left of the White House. His administration taking steps recently that seem to be aimed at protecting his legacy. So what does that entail? Let's talk about it with a man who spent quite a bit of time in the White House briefing room, our friend Niall Stanage, White House columnist for The Hill, up late with me tonight here on the Final Five. What an opportune time to have you here tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Plenty to talk about.
Yeah. Let's first of all talk about the Biden legacy, as it were. What will it be? Because first, I mean, it's the first president in how many years to not stand for re-election, right. And clearly they're looking to make some things permanent, make his presence known, because he's also being replaced by the man who would very much like to undo a lot of that.
Yeah, and that's a real problem from the Biden perspective. Firstly, I think being a one-term president always leaves you open to be seen as a failure. Obviously, he was not defeated, but he was essentially pushed out by his own party, so that's a problem. In terms of the actual legacy, his supporters would talk about things like infrastructure investments, the Inflation Reduction Act, the legislative accomplishments that he has racked up. He doesn't appear to have got much thanks for that from voters, but they would argue that the view of history will be kinder.
Infrastructure has been something that we know the first Trump administration tried and tried again. It's infrastructure week, and there was always something that got into the way of roads and bridges, which are something that really should be bipartisan because it benefits just about anybody out there, Democrat or Republican.
Yeah, that's right. But I think in the political culture that we have right now, members of either party are loath to give a president of the other party a win, quote unquote. No, you're quite right. Roads and bridges shouldn't have a red or blue badge attached to them. But I just think that in such a polarized time, there is a reluctance to vote in a bipartisan fashion, even for those kind of topics.
How much has the turmoil in the Mideast played into how we look at the Biden administration and more specifically foreign policy?
I think it has played in a lot. I mean, President Biden came in promising an ethical, moral foreign policy. Certainly people who are broadly sympathetic to the Palestinians wouldn't see it that way at all. Yes, there are very pro-Israel Democrats, there are very pro-Israel members of the public, but that has been a real problem on his left flank, the belief that he has permitted Benjamin Netanyahu's very right-wing government far too much impunity.
Something that has been talked about extensively is the idea of messaging and what the White House did right, and more importantly, what it did wrong along the way, because we're in these polarized times. People are going to believe what they want to believe. The Democrats thought, hey, look, job numbers are down, the economy's great, but the reality seems to be, if you're not feeling it yourself, it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, particularly something like inflation, for example. It is objectively true that the rate of inflation has fallen very, very significantly from its peak. But when it was at its peak, it inflicted an enormous wound on a lot of people. It inflicted a political wound on President Biden. I don't think he really recovered from that at any point.
We make no aspersions that we tape these segments sometimes, and granted, anything can happen. It's just a little bit after 7:30 right now, but we're in the middle of this big spending bill battle. President-elect Trump has made it clear that he wants his presence known now, that he wants his policies to take effect as soon as possible. He certainly has the Republican votes to make it happen out there. So how quickly do we see, I assume we've already seen very quickly that he wants his influence made on this Congress.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to make a long and rather complicated story short, there is a proposed deal to keep the government open. Trump has weighed in against that, despite the fact that it has the backing of Republican Speaker Johnson. Obviously, Trump really flexing his muscle. And the party itself is much more firmly in his control than it was even during his first presidential term, Jim.
And the fact that we have this debate, and we've had this many times, and you know very much in the briefing room, we've come down to this wire many times. It's up against the backdrop of a transition, and clearly, come January 20th, the Trump administration would love to hit the ground running, not just with policy, but with nominees.
Yeah, absolutely, and something that I think that we've seen the president-elect try to do is smooth the path for his remaining nominees. There are several controversial ones: Pete Hegseth, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr. Trump is really trying to push hard for them because, of course, he already lost Matt Gaetz, an extremely controversial nominee for Attorney General, who withdrew his name from consideration.
Yeah, and it seems, though, Democrats have to understand you just don't have the votes, and you can put up the roadblocks, but there is seemingly a focus by some Democrats of saying, okay, we'll let some of these get through. We're going to give the president-elect, he has the right to pick his cabinet. They seem to be a little more conciliatory, but also a little more realistic that being obstructionist is not going to pay pay off the whole way through.
That's right. And I mean, the fact of the matter is, President-elect Trump's victory in November's election was clear-cut. It was by no means a landslide, but it is not contested. Right. There's no dispute over it. There was a very fiercely fought election. He won, and he won pretty clearly.
As we look at what's ahead, I know we talk primarily about the White House here, but it seems like Mike Johnson, does he befall the same fate as Kevin McCarthy over the next couple of weeks, depending on what happens here?
He has a very tough job, but his biggest advantage may be who else would want to do it, right? I mean, being presiding over the very fractious Republican conference is enormously difficult. Johnson came to that post in the first place because it was difficult to get enough support for anyone else, so the lack of an alternative may be to his advantage.
Well, we'll see. I don't think anybody could have predicted the ups and downs going into this last Congress, but here we go again. Niall Stanage, always great to have you in.
Always a pleasure.
Great to see you. Final Five is back after this.